Hello everybody, welcome to another mixing tutorial. Obviously, if you guys have seen, I am rebranding this channel to Ropanu2, and I'm rebranding my main channel to Ropanyuganti from the old adorable Swiggles. So, thank you guys for bearing with that. And I asked on Twitter what you guys wanted to see next from tutorials, or if there was anything that I did recently that was really cool. And the big one that I got was basically showing a mix of something less traditional rock or traditional metal, but something closer to what I do with synthesizers, strings, and I figured what better way to plug my own stupid EP than to show how I mixed it. So this is, again, going to be one of those videos where if you're just here to copy my settings, you'll enjoy it. And if you're here to kind of learn, hopefully you'll enjoy it a little more. To begin, this is a cover of Rito Village from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, I covered this song as the 5th song on an EP I created with Materia Collective publishers called The Wild EP, and it was unbelievably humbling how the EP was received, and I'm very proud of this song for some reason. It's not a very special arrangement, honestly. There's very little changes across the tune, but basically, the reason why I chose this song is also because it has a lot of instruments. Many of you mix. Not everyone's into the crazy metal, whatever. That's perfectly fine. I think that there's a lot to learn from this song in particular. So, as per tradition, I'm just going to play a little bit of the song so you get a feel for it. It's kind of like piano rock for a little bit. So that was a bit generous, but that was 30 seconds, and as you can tell, this was mixed across, this entire EP was made in 11 days, so I don't stand by all the decisions made. In fact, towards the rock part, you'll hear there's distorted guitars panned left and right, of course, and that's where, oh, we didn't even use these 2 tracks, see? It's just part of the template. The drums might be too high. Now, one reason why they might sound quiet is because I changed my drum kit in Progressive, or Foundry, and Superior Drummer 2, so you may notice that. So the first thing I want to go over, because I find this to still be an issue, or rather a question I receive often is, how do you write drums? How are you playing the drums? And more importantly, how do you make drums sound good and realistic? And, honestly, the best thing you're going to find is you're going to have a real drummer play it. But if that's, inconvenient, because of screen recording, it might be difficult to load. Open in MIDI editor. There we go. So what you're looking at is what I'd like to consider a very dynamic approach to writing drums. So what I would like to not spend too much time on is just demonstrate the beginning of the song is a lot of hi-hat pedal work. Something you'll observe from watching real drummers is just how they can contribute to quiet parts. And notice how every single hi-hat hit is kind of just designed differently. It's loud, soft, 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 loud, soft, 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 soft. And there's a lot of ghost noting here. If you don't include these, instantly you can kind of tell that it's programmed, but just bringing these in does make it feel slowly more and more like a nice song. Someone's tapping on the toms, and eventually you know switch around. You have to approach this as if you were playing it in a concert live. The only things that are very stagnant tend to be the kick drums, because I don't want them to be overpowering. But as you'll find with Superior Drummer, it might sometimes make more sense to just keep these things very loud, to stand out in the mix. So if we fast forward a little bit to the rock part and take a listen, just from the MIDI point of view. And that was, again, quite a bit, I apologize. But the idea behind this is just liveliness, fills, and never making it feel like someone programmed the drums as a backing track. The words backing track really grind me to my core when I hear people describe the music side of like a song that's sung, because that already begins to tell me, you know, there was no love given to the instruments, and that's basically what people are listening to in addition to the vocalist. Of course, in this case, a lot of people treat the non-lead guitar and the solo parts to be backing track, and that's just not the case. So if you're programming drums, treat them as if, you know, it was a drummer. So now that I've kind of given you the the shtick about drums, just from a writing point of view, it's always good to humanize. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. In Reaper, I'll just go ahead and show you since this is a tutorial, I guess. You select all the parts you want. I'm holding down right mouse, and then I'm clicking and dragging. So all the toms and all those higher strikes and stuff. And then you can go to, where is it? I'm so used to okay, edit, humanize. Timing will shift it. Timing bias, this left side means, oh, let's make it feel a little earlier. This side makes it, oh, let's make it a little later. So you can do that. And then velocity percentage is how much percent you want humanized. So it's like a nice touch if you didn't write it, you know, from scratch already. I find myself having to use it less and less, honestly. Sometimes I forget it, and I'm okay with that. So that's basically a good look at the drums before we even get into mixing. This is supposed to be like a mixing with Ro, and we're not really talking about mixing. So just to give you like some background, this is the drum kit I'm using. I'm using the Superior Drummer 2.4, and I also purchased the Progressive Foundry SDX while it was on sale, and it's a fantastic set. It's basically a different product. So I have like small pitch adjustments on a few things, and I'm using a Mapex Black Panther snare. I'm also using an X drum, like an extra drum. And this is the Ludwig Black Beauty. So it's just layering. So one of the drums focuses more on like the body and the low end side, and then one of them has more of that snappy sound, and I just prefer that. Now this kick's also, it's got like a little bit of realism to it. So I was going for something that's different. Not your clickety metal powerhouse, and not necessarily something like classical, whatever, like traditional roomy sound, just something in the middle. And then all of these toms are kind of like mix matched. Most of them are Pearl Masters, I suppose. I have just, let's see, like 4 or 5 different cymbals, a ride. We got like a nice crash here. So you can hear like the sonic placement's really nice. And I've got this really nice hi-hat that kind of has more room sound than actual sound. It just, the sound I was going for in the Wild EP was just something that like drifts in and out, and it feels like powerful but warm. So as far as like the mixing goes in here, if you want to like copy everything, that's fine or whatever. But the idea here is I just have different in mics for the kicks, and I basically needed more clicking coming out, so I tried out one of these presets that you get, and then I just kept all of my routing. because I am mixing inside Reaper, like 90% of it. There's just a few EQ things. Obviously the bleed, the snare bottom has some kick, just small connections to keep the drum kit feeling connected. The overheads, I kind of get rid of the hi-hats. I include my extra snare. There's actually 2 overhead mics that you can get for, there's 2 overhead mics that you can use in Progressive Foundry, and that's always kind of fun. So I like having one of them that just gets everything in the room. That one's a little quiet too. And again, this is because this kit was kind of designed to feel a little different. Normally, I wouldn't even dream of having half of this stuff bleed in, and I'd keep it a little different. I have an ambient close mic and the ambient far mic, and it's kind of just like, I'm not even like using much of these, honestly. The mono mic has everything, so it's just a little space conscious, and more importantly, then we go into the mixing of the actual kit. So I actually like cut off a lot of the low end here. For whatever reason, I felt like it was already so thumpy. See if I bring it back. You're still, most of the fundamental frequencies, most of like those low thumpy sounds are coming in anyway, so I felt like it was fine to harsh cut, but realistically we can try mixing it like this. And see how we got that thump there. So that'd be how I mixed it if I didn't have a stressed deadline of 11 days. And then I'm using the glue, which is a fantastic little compressor, but honestly it's not anything special per se. You know, it doesn't have any features that another compressor doesn't. Now this is like a light compression because I have the parallel compression track now, which is basically a drum track dedicated to compressing your kit at a very harsh level to blend in. So this is like more traditional rock mixing here. I could actually bring in the whole. But see, now it's clickety. So to fix that, you can drop some of the range. That's alright. The snare, I probably got the same preset. I'm just raising a lot of the highs here and giving a little more body. And then for the compressor here, I'm using the glue again, just experiment. And I started with this preset, which was okay. And obviously you have to adjust the threshold. I'm not going to explain every video how a compressor works, but the bottom line is when you hit the threshold of volume, for every ratio, basically, this one's like really hard actually. Let's try 4. For every 4 decibels of volume trying to get in, they're all, you know, pushing against the door like that scene in Titanic. Only one gets through. That's kind of like filtering out your sound, but it is control. So, see, we were like losing 4. I think that's a little more reasonable. So that's not too bad. And then I've got FabFilter Saturn here, which is kind of like you could distort your, you know, your snare, but I kind of like how I have it here. And this is just a lot of EQ based settings. So see how like 4,000 beyond, there's a little bit of a boost, and then like around 1,000 hertz, we've got a little bit of a boost and some drive. So this kind of gives it back a little bit of some bite, which it really shouldn't have to at that point. But again, we're looking at an older project, and so this is a little bit of a retrospective, if anything. So the next thing, of course, is overheads, and this is where I might be overkilling. But to get rid of harshness, I basically do a few cuts here. But I basically, let's pull that up. I basically don't need anything below here anyway. So you know, the snare and your kick and all that stuff, it's going to stay down here, and the room mic will actually pick up quite a lot of body, so I don't mind having like a filter here. Sometimes you can go like down here, but I just found with Superior Drummer, that's the kind of game you're playing, you know, not harsh. I found from here, just having like a little bit of some EQ control is very nice for overheads, and I actually had to duck quite a lot of these very high tinny what you're listening to is a mastered version without a limiter, so you'll hear a little bit of like some cleanup and warmth in the equalization, but I just figured, you know, this is a retrospective as well as a mixing kind of overview. It's not let's mix a song from scratch kind of video. I find those videos to be a little more informative. Now, hi-hats, let's look at a good spot with. Now, I can't stress this enough. Ever since 80s, maybe later, probably way later actually, a drummer perspective or mixing things as if you were in the seat of the drummer just makes way more sense for me. It sounds more enjoyable and you can air drum to it, but you know, if you're trying to do something that sounds absolutely realistic to original mixing, then by all means just do the opposite of what I panned. But I found it sits nicely around the side here, not too far. And then I'm just doing some like basic control compression. It's actually not really hitting it, so. See, this is what happens when you do presets, kids. Something changes. Well, honestly, considering it has like very little usage in this song. Yeah, see, we're just barely losing 1 decibel here, so I don't think it's a huge deal. Now, I'll go over toms, but they're pretty much preset. So, I actually can't think of a time I use toms. Here, let's try like a fill. This is probably the wrong way to go about this. There you go. So, it's pretty much just like a little bit more strike here and some control. So these aren't rumbly, but I kind of prefer that for the sound. It's something like here. Or not. Yeah, something like that. And for control, you know, you can just drop down a little bit of compression. I know that sounded terrifying, I'm sure. Now, one of the most important things is utilizing a room microphone. It's very easy to tell when a programmed drum does not have any room sound. This is combining a mono as well as some stereo mixing. Now, what I had here, sorry, it keeps disappearing, is kind of a little aggressive. So let's just hear what it sounds like without it. It's basically all snare drum. And now, you're getting like the guts of the snare. So this is like basic, and that's with the room mic. Now, parallel compression is kind of a fun time. You basically send all the tracks you want compressed together, and then you do a little bit more of a harsh compression. So this thing's like smashed. Did I turn it off? Huh. One sec. So this thing's usually like very like heavy, so if you take it out, it doesn't have as much push. So it's always fun to have that going on. Now the snare verb's the same as before, but it's a gated. So I'm using this verbiage trial, and basically you crank the wet and you're sending a snare into it. And I found not to make it super wide. That way it doesn't get too far out of where you want it. And it just sounds like really powerful. (1980s) 1990s. Nah, it's all right. That's basically how I made the drum sound for Rito Village. Okay, I accidentally closed the project, so the drums are going to reload, but I guess that gives us a good time to quickly go over plate reverb. I used a reverb response from, you know, another package, and basically plate kind of has like this bright spank to it, but I find it like decays at the right speed for me. So it doesn't build up, it doesn't turn into some terrible mess, but I've been EQing my reverbs very carefully, so this one just barely lets in any of that muddy stuff. It kind of like pulls it down. And that's because I don't find bass requiring a lot of reverb to sound cool, bass frequency instruments, so I'm just happy with that. And for the hall reverb, which is where all the lead guitars and synths and piano go, I'm using this Chicago mic set reverb that I've used for ages, just because it has like the right balance of like wideness and distance. And then of course the way I EQ this is, oh, I actually have a better preset I made. So basically I kind of let all the bass things fly, and then I have this high shelf, and that's what's like bringing out the like singingness of it all. So let's take a look at the lead guitars. So I can't really show you the tones. I mean, I guess I can. So let's do that. But these are all recorded wet through my ASUS FX8320. So the tones I created are basically going to be, it'll take a second to load up. Basically, I call them like Zelda lead, Zelda rhythm, and stuff. So just to give you guys a glimpse of what exactly I used, we have a noise gate. It's at 57 dB threshold. It's pretty tight ratio as well, just so that I can get some of those really, really tight spots cleaner, and I don't have to slice as much out. There is a compressor pedal here, but it's turned off. I have an overdrive pedal with just a little bit of drive, just to get a little messy, because I do like it a little bit like that. You know, cranked up level as much as possible. And the tone's actually not like maxed out. This way, you have more of a warm tone, and you don't ruin the song for the leads or the piano or anything. I hate, you know, hearing guitars that are just so boisterously like harsh, and then you don't get to hear the lead guitars. It happens now and then. And then the amplifier is a Friedman HBE V1 amplifier. This has just been my go-to. It's incredibly warm, despite it having enough aggression for me to make, you know, into some sort of jaggedy guitar thing. Everything's at like near 5. It's funny. The depth is actually kind of like your resonance frequencies, and this gets it a little boomy. So depending on the guitar, this is not worth keeping on. Then I have the bright switch on, which, you know, just engages a little bit more, you know, brightness and trebles to kind of cut through. Then the cabinet I used was it was an impulse basically of a 4x12 Recto with a SM57. So it's kind of like your go-to metal deal. And if you wanted that to become a lead tone, pretty much just delay reverb, maybe increase some other stuff. Maybe like some of the treble. And that would be it. So that's pretty much the tone for the EP. Now for the lead guitars, of course, we start with a clean guitar. Let's see what's going on here. So I'm using Valhalla Shimmer, and this is just a really nice delay plugin, but honestly, if I wanted to, I could just use the Axe FX delays. They're honestly as good. Now the tone is a slightly overdriven guitar. It's not something I could replicate with bias effects or anything else in my experience yet. It's just incredibly close to a real amp. And then, as you can... These two guitars are very quiet and coated in reverb, but they're also using like split coils and stuff that gives it a little more brightness and uniqueness. So they just like sit here and they're like reversed. So this was done with my Ibanez RG 350M. So inexpensive guitar, but it sounds fantastic. And the real lead guitar, of course, like the distorted one, it goes on. If you get to like the guitar solo, you'll basically hear the tone I showed you. This is honestly just like a lot of in the fingers mixed with the guitar I used more so than just how I mixed it. The overall lead guitars, they're going through quite a few cuts, but basically I don't like guitars sounding tinny. I need them to have a little bit more, you know, guts going on. So I basically cut out this nasally frequency area, and that's basically all the carving I'm doing. And whenever there's too many guitars, I just have like a modest compressor, 2.66 slow attack, and that's like for maybe this spot. See, I'm not losing a lot of volume. So I'm not losing a lot of volume at all there, and that's one of the most important parts. You don't want to lose volume. If you slap on a compressor preset, you are only doing half the job you need to do. You need to adjust the threshold and observe how it affects the mix as a whole, especially if, you know, if you want to compress guitars, which many people don't even see the need to, but I do, in very small cases like that section, just so that you have the smoothness. You know, just be sure of what you're doing there. Now, for rhythm guitars, I'd like to say they're way easier. You got 100% left, 100% right, 2 tracks, the tone you just saw. We got some EQ. Let's take a look. So this is one of the like mid cuts because of the nature of my guitar, which was the RG7421. So it's a little fat, and just trim some of the mud. Now, some of you guys might be like slicing huge divots here to make room for the leads, and some of you might not have done anything. I find that like just picking a few spots and then being smart with the EQ is a better idea, because the lead guitars in my songs are usually with some of the most important elements, but I don't want to lose the element of the groove in the rhythmic section. So if we listen to the whole thing, like mafia style or whatever you want to call it. And then for stuff like this, so it is a very important part of the entire song. Nonetheless, there is a small compressor that I tried out. Again, I think I discovered this compressor and I just felt like using it, but you should honestly be happy using anything. So what I have here is just like now I kind of wish I had a low pass and then I was compressing the low end. So I would definitely recommend using Comp or some other freeware that can do that, because this is already over compressing a little bit. So having the attack and release very fast, it just gives a little bit more of a transparent but more controlling sound. So as a result, I just barely want to compress these guitars at all. If anything, just blending this down might help. The only reason why I find the reason to compress rhythm guitars especially is if you find your tone or even the guitar itself is just a little bit uneven across the EQ spectrum to where it's bothering. So I find 7-string guitars to be really boomy, and I find good tones of extended range rhythm guitars in metal to not be too boomy, but it's just a good failsafe. Just going down the list, let's take a look at the clean guitars, because I do have like this happy little almost preset I did here. Oh, something's definitely out of tune there. There we go. So it's kind of like rhythm guitars, but I just made a much bigger divot here. Now, if this were me like today, I'd also add maybe like a high shelf here. So I have a single rhythm guitar here. Now, one trick I didn't do that I'd love to do is just send it to the opposite spectrum. So now you have guitar here and reverb on the left, and it's just a little bit stereoized. And you can just barely hear it. That's the thing. If you can mix this kind of music where you don't hear jutting sounds, keep things quiet until they're mixed and loud until they're harsh, but go in that order. I think that's just so much nicer. And during this spot, you can hear I've got a small space pad, or just like a synthesizer pad going on here. Simple notes, and that's actually the question I got in the first place. How do you balance synths and strings? And we're getting there, I promise. But during this part, the guitars are pretty much Axe effects only, just small delays, massive amount of reverb on the right side too. So that's basically how I would deal with clean guitars. Bass guitar is kind of a fun one because I change it all the time. This is the DI, so the direct input. So I don't know why I felt the need to drop that so harshly. I think something happened towards here. So one thing to know is your bass, especially active EQ systems, that's where your tone comes from, more so than maybe even like the amp itself. And if you make it too harsh, you'll just play like clean up, like I guess I was. So I like rolling off the sub bass just for control, something that 16 Mono pointed out. I recorded this song with 2 Axe FX tones. This is the amped one. So I didn't want too much highs, and I let the DI kind of carry through here. And you're like, this is way too quiet, but and the compressor's just barely capturing anything that gets too high. If I had lowered it a little, that might help, just barely. Now, when we get to the distorted bass, this is a completely different tone. So I kind of took a little bit of the subs, dropped the middle ground a little bit where the guitars come in, and just give a little bit of bite without, you know, making it too hairy. So the ending tone is pretty DI heavy, so I can make it a little gnarlier. And this is just a preset that I found, but I actually had to make a few notches here. See that like farty sound? So there I have much more control. It's not too flubby on the low end, and then I have a compressor going on here. And it's just barely affecting it, you know? And if I did like full control, that might have helped a little bit. So obviously you can see here, I have like a lot of samples just to help ease transitions. No bass booms. I'm sorry for those who enjoy bass booms. And I'm even sorry for everyone who hates them. But overall, that's the bass guitar sound that I was going for. Again, it might not sound amazing on its own, but the point of it is to fit in my mix. Now, here's where you guys probably asked for the tutorial and have been waiting. This is how to mix synthesizers with metal guitars as far as I've done. So I have an extremely harsh high-pass filter here because all this stuff is guitar territory. And then I still have some cuts here so they don't like get in the way of the lead guitars. The worst thing you can do for your singer or your lead melodies is to like muffle them down. Not saying you need to put the maximum blast on top. So I had a few things going on here. So I had a massive synthesizer. The reason why I made this lead match for this album is because I felt like it helped my guitars stay more close to the melodies, but it also kind of blended into a spacier sort of sound. I find that if you're very like noodly and improvisational like I am, it's good to use this to keep your just feet on the ground and not go too ballistic, and you reinforce your melody much better. There's some delay, and obviously it's going to yeah, see, I just made it into a warm tone. I cut it off 122 and 4K, but it's just a warm sound that blends well. I'm using Expand as like a fake synthesizer strings, but I'm blending that with Massive again in like a more I think these were called Blade Runner strings. So it's a little stereo, and then I have a small ADO sample library that I'm using to add a little more realism. And then we have the space pad at the bottom. So if you listen with the guitars, so it has a very slow build because it's realistic, and the sample library doesn't have a ton of fast attack, but what it does is it fills in all those gaps sonically. So if we take a look at my EQ spectrum, it's just much more consistent in that area. So I think you'll find that to be a more advantageous way to approach synthesizer blending. The last thing, of course, is let's look at piano. This is piano sent to me by David Russell, one of the best piano players on YouTube, and one of the coolest dudes I know, of course. I mix the piano two different ways. This is the I'm not in the middle of a crazy metal part mixing. So the bass guitar occupies here. Just small cuts for the lead. I find that working with David is very easy because of my style, especially in this sort of area. But when it comes to working with metal, mixing him can be a little difficult. The compressor here is a little strong just to keep some consistency. It's around -5 dB of loss, but I'm doing it at such a slow attack, it doesn't sound like some compressed mush, it sounds controlled. Now, when we get to the metal, that's when it becomes a compressed mush. So, I'm cutting him off even further, but I'm bringing up these, like, powerful notes that get struck around here, and I'm leaving some space for the leads, and this makes it into like a rock piano. It sounds like something you'd hear on those expensive pianos that are used for live shows. So the compressor, it's going to get dicey. I actually used FabFilter Saturn here and ran him through an amp as if we were playing this live, basically, and it cuts through better. This is something I learned from playing with Geminon. At MagFest, we had a piano there, and everything was coming through when it was brighter. at the end of the motif and the end of the album, we hear it cut through beautifully. And basically the idea with piano is, in a rock's context, control it based on your mix. For progressive metal, piano can be really hard, but it is absolutely rewarding. So you've seen this EQ. This is a preset I found from one of Nolly from the band Peripheries tutorials, and I've been trying to adapt to it. Not because I want to rely on the same EQ, but it is easier for me to brighten the mix afterwards using that, rather than, you know, try to dull a mix later. I'm using iZotope as usual, but this is kind of like a preliminary compressor, so I use it mostly for the low bands. Notice how like harsh the bass control is. It might be too much even. Main thing to look for again when compressing is gain reduction, as well as how it sounds. If you're losing too much volume, it's probably also going to sound very like, you know, lossy and flat, or even pumpy. When you get that pumping sort of weird volume change, that definitely means that your auto gain is recovering too much, which means you're compressing. So I have like a secondary sort of compressor, and it ignores the low end because we already compressed it. This is to avoid over compressing. And it's only really raising whenever the snare hits or the leads come in too hard. So that helps make up for things. And then I have this preset I made called Bright Master that I've been enjoying, and it kind of just like adds a little bit of tape saturation and even a little bit of gain to some of the high bands while not messing with the low bands. And then finally, you would use a limiter, and usually I'm just trying to get it close to. So this is at the point at which music needs to be clipped because it's too loud to reproduce. So I tend to put my limitation around here at 0.20 dB or -2 dBFS or whatever scale it is. I'm not the best, you know, waves physicist here. So and that's pretty much all there is to it. So if there's any takeaway from this, you know, I really do hope you enjoyed the album mix. I know that the biggest thing I wish I could have done is probably raise the volume of the drums quite a bit without making it into like some sort of boisterous metal album. But hey, I made the EP in 11 days. I'm pretty proud of that. So if I did not answer all your questions, if you're infuriated that I did something the wrong way, if you'd like to see another tutorial, another mixing with Ro, you know, leave it in the description. Let me know. If any of this helped you or you have any questions, please let me know. And